Samantha's parents had always been a little overprotective. They believe that it is important for parents to be involved in their child's life, but it is also essential to allow them to make their own decisions and take risks when they grow older. Parents should provide guidance and support and allow their children to explore and learn from their mistakes. It is also vital to set boundaries and expectations, but also to be flexible and understanding. However, they had never gone as far as installing a camera in her bedroom. They had always trusted and had faith in her, but when she started acting strange and distant, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. So they decided to take matters into their own hands and set up a small camera in her room to see what was happening. It was a difficult decision for them, but they felt it was necessary. When they watched the video, they were shocked and horrified by what they saw. It was a complete shock to them, and it changed their lives forever. They had never expected to see their daughter in such a state, which was heartbreaking. Her parents, Todd and Hannah, chose a discreet camera that would be hidden in a stuffed animal so that Samantha wouldn't notice it. The stuffed animal was a small brown teddy bear with a big red bow around its neck. It had a friendly face, 2 beady eyes, and a soft, plush body. Todd and Hannah carefully placed the bear in the corner of Samantha's room, making sure it was visible every night. They had chosen a discreet camera hidden inside the bear, hoping it would capture why their beloved daughter had changed so much. The bear was a comforting presence in the room, and Samantha often hugged it when feeling down. It was a reminder of her parents' love and support, even when they weren't around. They had high hopes that the camera would provide them with the answers they sought. They hoped the camera would capture why their beloved daughter had changed so much. They prayed it would help them understand why their daughter had become so distant and withdrawn. After a week, they took the camera from her room and plugged the USB into their computer. They took one final look at each other and sighed. This would be the moment they would, hopefully, get the answers they were searching for. Todd reached for the mouse and pressed play. But why was Samantha acting differently? And what will they see in the footage? The anticipation was palpable as Todd and Samantha stared at the computer screen. They had been waiting for this moment for a week, since they had taken the camera out of Samantha's room and plugged the USB into their computer. They had been searching for answers and were about to get them. Todd's hand hovered over the mouse, and he took one final look at Samantha before pressing play. But why had she been acting so differently? What would they see in the footage? The room was silent as the video began to play. Todd and Samantha watched intently, their eyes glued to the screen. They had no idea what they were about to discover, but they were both filled with a sense of dread. Would the footage provide the answers they were looking for? Would it explain why Samantha had been acting so strangely? They both held their breath as the video continued to play, and they waited to see what would be revealed. Todd and Hannah had been together for many years and had been through a lot. They had faced financial struggles, health issues, and even the death of a beloved family member. But nothing had been as difficult as the loss of their child. It had been a devastating blow to the couple, and they had struggled to cope with the grief. Despite their best efforts, the pain of their loss was always present. The couple had tried to move on and start a new family, but the memory of their lost child was always there. They had tried to fill the void with new experiences and activities, but nothing could replace the love and joy that their child had brought to their lives. They had tried to find solace in each other, but the pain of their loss was too great. The couple had also tried to find comfort in their faith, but it was difficult to find peace in the face of such tragedy. They had prayed for strength and guidance, but the pain of their loss was still there. They had tried to find comfort in the memories of their child, but the pain of their loss was still too great. They had also sought solace in the support of their friends and family. They had been overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and support they had received, which helped them cope with their grief. They had also found comfort in knowing their child was in a better place. Gary, Hannah, and her husband Todd had recently suffered a great loss. In an effort to help them cope, Hannah's brother Gary decided to move in with them for a few months. He thought it would be a good way to lighten the load of housework and provide some much-needed support. Little did he know that his 2-month stay would turn into something much longer. Gary quickly became an integral part of the family, helping out with the chores and providing a listening ear when needed. He was always there to lend a hand, and his presence was a great comfort to Todd and Hannah. As the months went by, it became clear that Gary was not planning on leaving anytime soon. Gary's presence was a great blessing to Todd and Hannah. He was always there to lend a helping hand and provide a listening ear. He was a source of comfort and support during a difficult time. He was also a great source of joy and laughter, bringing light and happiness into their home. His presence was a reminder that they were not alone in their grief. Gary's stay was extended far beyond the 2 months he had originally planned. He stayed for over 2 years and eventually bought a house on the same street as Todd and Hannah. His presence was a great blessing to them, and his decision to stay was a testament to the strength of their bond. He was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is still hope and love. When they found out they were expecting again, they were overjoyed, but also filled with a sense of dread. They had already experienced the joys and struggles of parenthood, and they knew that this new addition to their family would bring with it a whole new set of challenges. They vowed to protect their new child at all costs, and when Samantha was born, they were overwhelmed with emotion. They felt an instant connection to her, filled with a sense of love and admiration. It felt like there wasn't a problem in the world they couldn't face, and they were determined to give Samantha the best life possible. They were filled with a sense of hope and optimism, and they were thrilled to watch her grow and learn. They were determined to provide her with a safe and loving home. They were committed to being the best parents they could be. They were filled with joy and anticipation and couldn't wait to see what the future held for their family. Samantha was a beautiful and vibrant baby, and as she grew into a toddler, her parents were always there to watch over her. They had been through so much and only wanted to make sure that nothing bad ever happened to her. Some might say they were overly protective, but only wanted to keep her safe. The only people Samantha was allowed to be alone with were her family, who made sure to keep a close eye on her. Samantha's parents wanted to make sure that she was always happy and healthy, and that she was never in any danger. They were always there to provide her with love and support, and to make sure that she was never alone. They wanted to make sure that she was always surrounded by people who cared about her and wanted the best for her. They wanted to make sure that she was never in any harm's way. Her safety and security was their top of mind all the time. As she grew older and became more independent, they couldn't help but notice a change in her behavior. She had become distant and less happy than she used to be. Samantha was no longer the same bubbly, outgoing girl they had known before. She became withdrawn and introverted, not talking much to anyone or even with her parents. She had become more reclusive, spending most of her time alone in her room. Her parents were worried and didn't know what to do. Todd and Hannah tried to talk to her, but she would just shrug them off and remain silent. They tried to get her to open up, but she refused to talk about her feelings. They tried to get her to go out and socialize with other kids her age, but she would just stay in her room. The couple tried to get her to do activities she used to enjoy, but the little girl had no interest in them anymore. They were at a loss as to how to help her. They tried to get her to see a therapist, but she refused to talk to her. They were desperate to help her, but she seemed to be slipping further and further away from them. Samantha had always been a creative and active child, full of life and enthusiasm. She loved to draw, paint, and explore the world around her. She was always eager to learn new things and try new activities. She was never afraid to take risks and try something new. But recently, something had changed. She had become uninterested in the things she used to love. Drawing, playing outside, and exploring the world around her had been her favorite activities. But now she only wanted to watch TV or play video games with her Uncle Gary. She had become more withdrawn and less interested in the things that used to bring her joy. She had lost her spark and her enthusiasm for life. She had become more and more isolated, and it was starting to worry her family. Todd and Hannah were deeply saddened to see their daughter go through this and tried to talk to her about it, but the toddler would get mad instantly. They had no idea what had caused this sudden change in her behavior, and it was heartbreaking to see her so distant and uninterested in the things she used to enjoy. They tried encouraging her to go outside and explore, but she refused. They tried to get her to draw and paint, but she was uninterested. They were at a loss for what to do, and getting her to engage in any activity was becoming increasingly difficult. They were desperate to return her to her old self, but it seemed impossible. One day, Todd and Hannah had had enough. They had been increasingly concerned about their daughter's behavior and wanted to find out what was happening. They wanted to know what was happening, but didn't want to invade her privacy. After much thought and consideration, they decided to take matters into their own hands and install a camera in her room. They knew it was a drastic measure, but they felt it was necessary to ensure their daughter's safety. The camera was small and discreet, so it wouldn't be too obvious. They placed it in the corner of the room, so it would be out of sight. They hoped that it would provide them with the answers they were looking for. They were both nervous and anxious, but they knew it was the right thing to do. The camera was set up and ready to go. Todd and Hannah waited anxiously for the footage to come in. It was a difficult decision, but they felt it was the only way to get to the bottom of the situation. They were both filled with emotions, but knew they had to stay strong. Todd and Hannah wanted to be able to help their daughter, and they were determined to find out what was going on. They knew it was a risk, but were willing to take it. They had to do something to protect their daughter and make sure she was safe. They spent hours researching the best camera for the job and eventually settled on one that was small and discreet. They installed it in her room and then waited to see what would happen. They were nervous, but they knew it was the right thing to do. They just had to hope it would help them get to the bottom of the mystery and protect their daughter. They told Samantha beforehand because lying to her didn't feel right. She was a bit taken aback when they told her about the camera, but she understood why they had to do it. She knew that it was for her own safety and that it was the only way to make sure she was safe, so she agreed to it. The camera was carefully placed in a stuffed animal that was placed in the corner of her room. It was small and discreet, so she couldn't spot it. They made sure to only turn it on at night when she was asleep, so they wouldn't watch her every move. They also made sure to keep the camera out of sight, so that it wouldn't be a distraction to her. The camera was connected to a monitor in the living room, so they could watch her from a distance. They also had a motion sensor connected to the camera so that they would be alerted if anything suspicious happened. The camera was a great comfort to Samantha's parents. They could rest easily, knowing their daughter was safe and sound in her room. They could also check in on her from time to time to make sure that she was okay. The first night they turned on the camera, they were nervous and anxious. They had no idea what they would find. They were scared of what they might see. Todd and Hannah had installed the camera in their daughter Samantha's room to make sure she was safe. However, they were worried that they might discover something that would hurt her. They had no idea what to expect and were filled with dread. The night was dark and still, and the only sound was the clock ticking. Todd and Hannah sat in the living room. They were both tense, their hands clasped tightly together. They had no idea what they would find, and they were scared of what they might see. However, they decided to check the monitor in a few more days. They had installed the camera in their daughter Samantha's room to make sure she was safe, but they were worried that they might discover something that would hurt her. The sun was just beginning to rise, and the sky was a beautiful shade of pink and orange. Todd and Hannah were both exhausted from the night before, but they knew they had to stay strong for their daughter. They had been up all night discussing what they should do and how to handle the situation. They had both been filled with a sense of dread, but they knew they had to do it for their daughter's sake. They had both been dreading the moment when they would have to watch the footage but they knew it was necessary. They had to make sure that their daughter was safe and that nothing bad had happened to her. A week had passed since the incident, and Todd and Samantha had been dreading the moment they had to watch the footage. They had been avoiding it, but they knew they had to face it eventually. Taking a deep breath, they grabbed the teddy bear from Samantha's room and made their way to the living room. Todd was about to plug the USB into the computer when the doorbell rang. He quickly placed the USB on the kitchen table and opened the door. "Ah, Gary," he said, his voice wavering. "This isn't a good time." Gary looked at them with a concerned expression, his brows furrowed. He had heard about the incident and wanted to make sure they were okay. Todd and Samantha exchanged a glance, both of them feeling a wave of relief wash over them. They had been so focused on the footage that they had forgotten about the support of their family and friends. Gary looked at him with a concerned expression, and Todd quickly explained the situation. He told him about the footage and how they were about to watch it. Gary nodded in understanding and offered to stay and help them through it. Todd thanked him for his offer, but politely declined. He knew that this was something they had to do on their own. Gary's face softened, and he gave Todd a reassuring pat on the shoulder. He could tell that Todd was nervous, but he knew he was strong enough to handle it. He gave Todd a small smile and stepped back, allowing him and his friends to watch the footage. He could feel the tension in the air, and he knew this would be difficult to watch. He glanced over at Gary, standing in the corner, his face a mask of concern. Todd could tell he was worried about them, but he also knew he was there to support them if they needed it. He gave Gary a small nod of appreciation. He took a deep breath and braced himself for what he was about to see. Gary stood in the doorway, his brow furrowed in confusion as he looked at his sister, Hannah, sitting at the kitchen table with a teddy bear and a USB drive next to her. He had no idea what was going on, but knew it was serious. He could feel the tension in the air, and he could tell that something was wrong. He had never seen his sister so still and quiet before. She was usually so full of life and energy, but now she just sat there, her eyes fixed on the table in front of her. Todd, Hannah's husband, was standing next to her, his face a mask of worry and concern. He had his arm around her, but it seemed to do little to comfort her. Gary could tell that Todd was trying to be strong for her, but he could also tell that he was scared. Gary took a deep breath and stepped into the kitchen. He wanted to help, but he didn't know how. He told them he'd come back later and left, leaving Todd and Hannah alone in the kitchen. He wished he could do more, but he knew that all he could do was wait and hope that whatever was going on would be resolved soon. Todd's hands trembled as he held the USB drive, his mind racing with the possibilities of what could be on it. He glanced over at Hannah, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. He could feel the tension in the air, the silence almost deafening. Taking a deep breath, he placed the drive in the laptop and pressed play. The room was filled with a tense silence as they waited to see what was on the drive. Todd's heart raced as he watched the screen, his stomach in knots as he anticipated what he might see. He glanced over at Hannah, her face now a mask of worry and dread. He reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently in an attempt to reassure her. He knew they had to face it together, whatever was on the drive. He could only hope that it would be something that would help them protect their daughter. The first clip from the first night was uneventful. Samantha lay sound asleep in her bed with her baby dolls by her side. She was snuggled up in her blankets, her head resting on her pillow, and her eyes closed in peaceful slumber. The room was illuminated by the soft glow of the nightlight, casting a gentle light across the room. Of course, she'd wake up a few times, but that wasn't out of the ordinary. She would usually just roll over and go back to sleep. The next clip was more similar, but the third clip they watched shocked and horrified them to the core. It was a scene of pure terror, with a figure lurking in the shadows and a strange noise coming from the corner of the room. Samantha was wide awake now, her eyes wide with fear and her heart pounding in her chest. She was too scared to move, too scared to make a sound. She just lay there, frozen in fear, until the figure finally disappeared. In the middle of the night, around 1 o'clock, Samantha's door slowly creaked open. Todd and Hannah, who were both lying in bed, heard the sound and immediately sat up, looking alert and fearful. They watched as a shadowy figure slipped inside the room, wearing black clothing and a hoodie covering his head. The figure slowly made its way to Samantha's bed and sat down. The room was deathly silent, and the only sound that could be heard was the clock ticking. Todd and Hannah were both too scared to move, and they just stared at the figure in disbelief. The figure seemed to be looking around the room as if searching for something. Suddenly, the figure stood up and walked towards the window. He reached out and tenderly ran his fingers through her hair, and Samantha seemed to ease up a bit. Todd and Hannah were still tense, however, as they observed the figure murmur something in Samantha's ear. She nodded in agreement, and the figure rose to its feet and started to make its way back to the door. He stopped for a moment, as if he was gazing back at Samantha, before finally exiting the room and shutting the door behind him. Todd and Hannah were left in the dark, pondering what had just occurred. They were both filled with a sense of unease, and the atmosphere in the room was heavy with apprehension. Todd and Hannah exchanged a glance, both of them wondering what the figure had said to Samantha. They were both filled with curiosity, but neither of them wanted to ask her about it. They were both too afraid of what the answer might be. After a few minutes, the figure stood up again and left the room. Todd and Hannah felt sick to their stomach. How can someone get into their house and not leave a trace? They watched the other clips, but they were all the same as the first two. It seemed like the figure only came one night out of the week, but why? Todd and Hannah were filled with dread as they watched the figure leave the room. They felt like they were being watched, like the figure was still in the room with them. The air felt heavy and oppressive, and the darkness seemed to be closing in on them. They felt like they were in a prison, unable to escape the figure's presence. The figure had left no trace of its presence, no footprints or fingerprints. It was as if it had never been there. Todd and Hannah were filled with fear and confusion. What was this figure doing in their house? Why did it only come one night out of the week? What did it want? The couple felt like they were in a nightmare, unable to wake up. They were desperate to find out what was going on, but they were too scared to investigate further. They had no idea what they were up against, and they were terrified of the consequences of finding out. The figure had left a lingering feeling of dread in the room. Todd and Hannah felt like they were being watched, like the figure was still in the room with them. They felt like they were in a prison, unable to escape the figure's presence. The couple was desperate to find out what was going on, but they were too scared to investigate further. They had no idea what they were up against, and they were terrified of the consequences of finding out. They had no idea who the figure was or what it wanted, and they were too scared to ask. They were desperate for answers, but they were too scared to look for them. Todd and Hannah were at a loss for words. How long had this been going on? They were aware that this was a sensitive matter that, if not handled with care, could leave a lasting impression on their daughter. They decided to keep it a secret from Samantha for the time being and made an appointment with a therapist. They were both filled with dread and fear, not knowing what the outcome of this would be. They had to make sure that their daughter was safe and protected, no matter what the cost. The couple had to make a difficult decision, one that could potentially change the course of their daughter's life. They had to make sure that Samantha was not exposed to any further harm. They had to be strong and brave, even though they were scared and uncertain. They had to put their daughter's well-being first and make sure that she was safe and secure. The two of them arrived at the police station feeling a sense of dread. The building was imposing, with its tall walls and barred windows. The atmosphere was tense, and the two of them could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on them. They had the footage in their hands, but it was unclear who the figure in the video was. They had to tell the police what had happened, even though they weren't sure if it would help. The officers were polite and professional, but the two of them could tell that they were skeptical. They asked a few questions, and then the officers began their investigation. The officers began to look through the footage, trying to identify the figure in the video. They asked the two of them to provide more information, but they were unable to provide any more details. The officers then began to look through the records of the area, trying to find any clues that could help them. They asked the two of them to provide a description of the figure, but they were unable to provide any more details. The officers then began to look through the records of the area, trying to find any clues that could help them. The officers searched the house with a fine-toothed comb, looking for any clues that could help them identify the figure in the footage. They looked through every nook and cranny, but they couldn't find anything that could help them. After a few hours of searching, the officers concluded that the investigation had reached a dead end. The two of them were disappointed, but they knew that they had done all they could. They thanked the officers for their help and left the police station, feeling a little bit more hopeful. Gary was filled with a sense of dread as he drove to Hannah and Todd's house. He had never been in this situation before, and he was unsure of what to expect. He was determined to protect his friends and keep them safe. When he arrived, he was welcomed with open arms and a warm hug from Hannah. Todd was a bit more reserved, but still grateful for Gary's help. Gary settled into the guest room and tried to get some rest. He was exhausted from the long drive, but his mind was racing with worry. He was determined to stay alert and keep watch over the house. He stayed up late into the night, listening for any suspicious noises. He was relieved when the morning came and nothing had happened. He was glad that he could provide some peace of mind for his friends. Gary spent the next few days helping Hannah and Todd with whatever they needed. He helped Todd with some yard work and even cooked dinner for them one night. He was glad to be able to do something to help them out. He also took the time to get to know them better and learn more about their lives. At the end of the week, Gary was relieved to see that the figure had not returned. He was glad that he could provide some comfort and security for his friends. He said his goodbyes and thanked them for their hospitality. As he drove away, he felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that he had done something to help. He was proud of himself for being able to provide a sense of safety and security for his friends. He was also thankful for the opportunity to get to know them better and to be able to help them in their time of need. They installed an alarm system and made all the necessary changes to make sure Samantha was safe. They'd let her sleep in Todd and Hannah's room for the first few nights. They expected her to return to her old self, but instead, she became more introverted and barely ever smiled anymore. She stopped talking to her friends and family, and she seemed to be in her own world. She would spend hours in her room, just staring out the window. She refused to go outside and play with the other kids, and she seemed to be in a constant state of fear. Her parents were worried and tried to get her to open up, but she wouldn't. They took her to the doctor, but the tests came back normal. They tried to get her to talk to a therapist, but she refused. They tried to get her to school, but she was too scared. They got her to do activities she used to enjoy, but she just couldn't seem to find the motivation. They went to the park, but she was too scared. They tried to get her to go to the movies, but she just wouldn't. The ordeal had a devastating effect on the family dynamic. Todd was filled with frustration and anguish, and he watched the footage from that night repeatedly, searching for any clues he may have missed. He became increasingly obsessed with the footage. Soon he was downloading an app on his phone to watch the security cameras 24/7. He was desperate to find any answers that could help him make sense of the tragedy. He was determined to find out what had happened that night and why. The family was in a state of shock, and Todd's obsession with the footage only added to their distress. His parents were worried about him and tried to talk him out of his fixation, but he was determined to find out the truth. He was convinced that if he watched the footage enough times, he would eventually find the answer he was looking for. Todd spent hours and hours watching the footage, but he never found the answer he was looking for. He was so desperate to find out what had happened that night, but he was unable to make sense of it. He was left feeling helpless and confused, and his obsession with the footage only made things worse. The family was struggling to cope with the tragedy. A strange sound. One night, at around 1 o'clock, Hannah and Todd were awoken by a strange sound. They looked around them and noticed the door was cracked open, shining a small beam of light inside the room. And to their surprise, Samantha was gone too. The night was dark and eerie, and the moonlight shone through the windows, casting a faint glow on the walls. Hannah and Todd were both filled with fear and confusion. Hannah and Todd were both frozen in fear, not knowing what to do. They stood there for what felt like an eternity, until finally the figure slowly began to move away. They both let out a sigh of relief, and they quickly ran back inside, locking the door behind them. They were both shaken up, but thankful that nothing bad had happened. Hastily, they rushed to the kitchen, their hearts pounding in their chests. As they rounded the corner, they were met with a sight that brought them immense relief. Sitting at the kitchen table was Samantha, their beloved daughter, and her uncle Gary, both of them enjoying a bowl of cereal. The warm, inviting aroma of the cereal filled the room, and the sound of their laughter echoed off the walls. The sight of the two of them together was a welcome one, and the parents couldn't help but smile. They watched as Samantha and Gary chatted away, their faces lit up with joy. The parents were glad to see that their daughter was in good company, and they were thankful for the presence of her uncle. A few days later, the police called with shocking news. They'd looked at the footage one more time and talked to a behavioral specialist about it. After a thorough investigation, they had finally identified the figure in the video. It was Gary. The police immediately arrested Gary, and Samantha finally felt a sense of relief. She had been living in fear for so long, but now she could finally talk about her experience. She was relieved to know that the police had taken the necessary steps to ensure her safety. The police had worked hard to uncover the truth and bring justice to Samantha. They had gone through the footage with a fine-toothed comb and consulted with a behavioral specialist to get to the bottom of the case. They had done their due diligence and were able to identify the figure in the video. The family was grateful for the police's hard work and dedication to finding the truth. They were relieved to know that the police had taken the necessary steps to ensure her safety. The police had done their job, and Samantha was finally able to feel safe again. She was relieved that the police had identified the figure in the video and arrested Gary. She was thankful for the police's hard work and dedication to finding the truth. She was finally able to talk about her experience without fear. She was grateful for the police's commitment to justice and ensuring her safety. Gary had been grooming Samantha for a long time, preparing her for the day he would take her from her parents and move to a cabin in the woods. He had been slowly manipulating her, making her believe that he was the only one who truly understood her. He had been filling her head with lies and promises of a better life, and she had been falling for it. Todd and Hannah had noticed the changes in their daughter and had started to worry. They had taken her to therapy to help her cope with the trauma she had experienced and to help her understand the truth about Gary. After months of therapy, Samantha had started to open up and slowly began to heal. She had grown up to be a strong, independent woman, no longer under the control of Gary. She had learned to trust her own judgment and to stand up for herself. She had also learned to recognize the signs of manipulation and to protect herself.